Now I need to go into each one of these and edit them. I'll select this one here and create a mask for it. So by using the mask, this way you can always, right now I'm painting with the black. If I reverse the order of these colors by hitting X, you can always go and paint over in a way that you reveal back again whatever that you have prevented from showing up. Now this area here is not supposed to be erased, but it's going to be shaded quite a bit, so I'll leave that for later. Now these ones here need to be erased or masked. So I'm just gonna make a masking pass. Now this one here, I'm probably gonna do it like this and then create a mask for it. B for brush. These. So again, this is not really like necessarily ideal, but I just added there just as a challenge. I'll move this away further just so it wouldn't be exactly on that corner, unless I want to take that challenge of going with a warp. That could be fun. You know, let's try it. Control T, right mouse button. It's a huge challenge because especially the texture, the resolution is already butchered to the point that it's almost hard to see what we're editing, almost. Just to see how much we can get out of the warp. And it's getting pretty pixelated to the point that the editing is pretty snappy. So I'll just keep it this way. This is good in terms of masking. This is good. This is good. Yeah. Okay. So masking is done. Now I'm going to go into the process of changing their opacity. I'm going to select all of these decals and reduce the opacity. So you might be thinking lowering the opacity would be a bad idea because it's reducing the density of stickers. We cannot just have them to have some transparency, right? But typically just reducing the opacity like maybe 95 would be beneficial. Also, in case you didn't know, this is a really important and useful shortcut. I mentioned it on one of my previous videos. In terms of the opacity of any layers, if you are on the V button or the select tool, once you click on the keyboard numbers, it's going to give you the opacity, meaning if I hit 7, it's going to give me 70%. 3 or 5 or 4 would give me based on that number. The other thing that also you might like to know is that let's say you want to have 95, then in that case you click 9 and 5 quickly. Now that is a really good shortcut because, you know, what if you want to just kind of figure out what is really the opacity that you want, especially that sometimes the nature of some of the stickers either disintegrate or maybe they're just kind of semi-transparent, so it's good to utilize the opacity whenever you feel it's needed. So I'm gonna go with 8, and as you can see it fits really nicely, right? It has enough of that opacity that makes it sort of blend. And soon you will notice that even though we have some really cool blending modes here, sometimes they just don't do what we need. So it's good to rely on a little bit of opacity, a little bit of blending modes, and I will probably run into a case where I would make a combination of all of them, and on top of that I would need even more. So I'm gonna select all of these now and hit 8. 8 seems to work just fine. You can see here it's letting more of that exposure or hotspots or clipping on that metal. So that's kind of a nice start. Okay, so I finished the first pass of masking, and now the second pass of opacity, and the third step would be doing some blending modes. So let's go with lighter and then go to the opacity of 100. And what do we get? This looks fine. just for experimentation, I'm gonna go and check the other blending modes. Although this is kind of changing the color, but I really like the way it's blending. This is a very nice blend as well. Though these are companies and their stickers have to be exactly the same, meaning that I cannot really modify the coloration because that basically changes the identity of that logo or company or sticker. So you cannot have so much freedom. You can have freedom with the way that you orient the stickers, but not in the way that influences or changes the colors as they're known to be. So I'm gonna go with lighter. And on top of the lighter, I'm going to reduce still the opacity to, say, 90, about 80, 85, 8 and 5. That looks good to me. The other thing that I would consider now is looking at the metal without it. You can see that you have consistent lighting. So in that case, there's no need for me to do any editing or retouching. One thing I will notice here is that the gap in here is larger than here. So I can hit Control T, hit Control, and then push this down at that. And there you go. Okay, that's good enough. Now for this one here, for the NASCAR, I'm going to go with mostly lighter. No, I think it's good the way it is. Just with the opacity, it's doing just fine. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna remove it away and see, since I'm not doing any blending mode typically give you this opportunity to blend it with the background in a way that you get some of that shading, very subtle shading that's taking place here. So since I'm not using blending mode, I gotta be careful. I cannot just leave it the way it is, even though I did apply the opacity. So I can simply just create a new layer on top of this sticker. I'm going to hit D on the keyboard to default these colors to black and white, and then hit B on the brush for the brush. And then with the brush, I can just really paint. This is very important here. This sticker here, I need to make a selection for it instead of painting like randomly. So I'm gonna click and hold Control, and then click with the left mouse button. Now I have a specific selection based on these pixels. And again, this is the new layer, and this is the one for the sticker. So I'm gonna paint here, click with the mouse, and then Shift, and then hit Control D to deselect. And then on this layer here, I'm going to hit 1 on the keyboard with the V selection tool on. So by hitting 1, I'm gonna give it 10% opacity, 2% opacity. It doesn't seem too much, but a little too much. So let's go with 1. And this is like barely noticeable, but you know, the principle is what I'm really practicing here. So whether it works in a way that it's visible or not, it's just for the sake of doing it properly. Now in this case here, this is kind of interesting because I have a lot of that hotspot area here, or the clipping, or the kind of overexposure. And what I need to do is to find a way to really mimic that kind of exposure there. And this is the case where I would create a new layer and then B as in brush. And then I'm gonna paint with this color here, like this, right? But instead, this is the new layer and this is the sticker. Click and hold Control, and then now on this layer here, I am going to paint with that color. I'm gonna undo and then go with something that is a little bit smoother. General brushes. Here, something soft. It's not that hard, that's good. Okay, hit Control D. I need to also cover this area here. So B, and then I can also practice this. Control and then click, and then go to select, modify, and then expand, like 2 pixels. Okay, now I can hit B just to make sure I get those. Maybe I'll just go with only 1 pixel. Yeah, I don't need more than 1 pixel. So expand 1 pixel, hit OK. Now I can be more consistent. Okay, so I just painted with that brush, and now just to kind of match this specular here, click with a brush and then shift, and now I'm gonna erase along that shadow line. So click, then somewhere here, click. Okay, Control D. Now selecting this here, I'm going to click 1 on the keyboard for opacity of 10%. 2, let's exaggerate it, let's go with 50. A little exaggerated, so let's go with 35. And I can easily just go to the blur tool here now. As you can see, I'm experimenting with a lot of tools. So that is one of, as I mentioned before, that's one of the reasons I am doing a lot of stickers instead of just few, just so I can experiment and also demonstrate the use of these tools in the proper context. So when I go here into the blur tool, I can just blur the pixels here, and just to make this a little bit more obvious, because you don't really know if I'm doing anything, right? It's not that obvious, it's pretty subtle. I'm gonna hit V and then hit 0, so I would go fully to the 100% opacity, then go back to that blur, and let's see if we get to see that obvious difference. B again, and just kind of just painting here with the B. It's already has some smoothness. Here's the blur. So the blur is kind of, see that merge that it's doing? Let me undo. Blur, right? So that's what I'm doing there, here. I can also hit Control T and hit Control and move this further. Kind of ruining this spot. No, never mind. Anyways, so 35, and it's good. It's good. This is a clean surface. Maybe I'm not gonna consider dirtying this up a little bit. Maybe on other ones. Let's go to this one. I'm just gonna create a new layer and hit B and just paint with the black right away, because the burn is not gonna affect the black area and not gonna affect the yellow as much as I need it. So I will need to just straight out just paint. I'm gonna do the same as before. Click and hold Control and then select, and then just to be safe, select and then modify and then expand 1 pixel. Okay, so on this I'm going to hit D, so the brush would default to black and white, then B just to make sure I'm on the brush. I'm just going to be painting this way. Control D, V for select, and then 1, about 20%, about 40%. See, it already blends much better, and it looks okay. Yeah, I'm not gonna go crazy with every little detail. Let's go with this one. I'm pretty excited about this one because that specular is gonna be interesting and it's gonna be challenging. This is one of the most exposed stickers, so I would assume that it can be a little bit dirty, and it could have some interesting kind of texture to it in a way that is kind of almost erased and peeled off. Create, I'm gonna make a selection. It seems like it's well selected, so there's no need to expand that selection. And then I'm gonna create a new layer, and then on that new layer hit B and then copy that specular color. It's very important to copy this color because it's not exactly white, right? and then go with the brush, and I'm gonna try to mimic exactly the pattern that is happening here, meaning that the brush needs to be similar. So let me hit Control D to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, B for brush, D to default black and white, right? And increase the brush. So you can see here that it's exceeding, but what I'm looking, it's exceeding that specular line, right? But what I'm looking at is both the size of the brush and also the amount of that feather around it. So click and then shift click. It looks kind of similar. It needs to be larger, like this. And with dropping the opacity, it would do a good job. So now I have the proper brush. Yeah, so let's try that. Okay, so this is the blank, and this is here the sticker. So hit Control and then select, and then go on this blank here, B, Alt, click and hold Alt so I can grab this color, and now click and click. It looks almost, yeah, it looks good. Control D. There are two things that I can do here, either dropping the opacity and just go on with it, or maybe I can blur the edges a little bit, because also I need to keep in mind that the fact that there is a sticker changes the way the material reacts to the sunlight. It's gonna make it more matte. So let me just go on with the idea of just dropping the opacity of this and see how far it could go. Or I could also use blending mode. So basically 3 methods instead of 2. I have blending modes or opacity, or also using some blurring and modification to this thing here, because it's not going to be reacting. I shouldn't consider this sticker just as a piece of the metal. It has different properties. Hard light seems good. What if I also reduce the opacity of it? Let's say 80. Let me go with normal. Oh, it's not that different. Yeah, so normal and 90 instead. And then I can also go here to the filter, blur, and box blur. Too much. Reduce. Just some blurring. The other thing that I can do also is to have 2 layers of this. So I'm gonna duplicate that layer, and I'm gonna drop the opacity for this one to just to have like an overall kind of body of that specular line. And then on this one here, just to provide that kind of blurring, I'm just gonna go into filter, blur, box blur, and just to give an overall kind of shine. Hit OK, and V, and then maybe 20% opacity. Okay, so now I can merge these 2 layers. Control E, and then go to opacity and maybe 70%, 80%, and then also hit Control U, and then I can play around now with the lightness or saturation, or I can hit Control L for levels. Yeah. Getting there. And of course, this is very important. You cannot have these stickers to be perfectly saturated. So I'm gonna try again to reduce more of that opacity. Yeah, let's try 70 first. Let's try 40. Then 50. 60. I like it this way. About 70. I feel like I'm at the optometrist. No, I like 60 better. Yeah, good, good, good. And yeah. Now I'm going to create a mask for this sticker. Then hit B, brush, because you paint on the mask with a brush. And I'm gonna look for something scattery like this one here. Right, like this. I'm going to reduce the brush size. You can just kind of dirty it up. You can also increase the brush size and also reduce the opacity of the brush. So meaning that instead of like erasing this way, by reducing the opacity, which also, by the way, you can click on like the numbers on the keyboard, like say 4 for 40. So instead of like going full opacity, it would only eat up some of the saturation. So I think, yeah, I think 40% would be decent. Let's try just here, gently. Of course, if I'm using my SenseLab tablet, it would definitely be better, but just using the mouse just to demonstrate at least the idea. And because we're using a mask, this is very important. You don't have to be too careful, because you can easily just go here to flip the colors by hitting X, and then you can repaint the areas that you are not a fan exactly of losing. And because of the randomness of this brush, it wouldn't repeat itself in a predictable way, which makes it really nice. So by the way, I'm now going like either black or white, like interchangeably. Yeah, so the fact that it's kind of random, you're not gonna get always the same result. So it's always good to try like multiple passes. Yeah, so that looks good to me. I could definitely try the same process here. So use a mask, then brush. You don't want to overdo it, and you don't want to make it feel too repeated. The other thing you should consider is, like, you know, if there's if this is like an air pocket here, I would assume that a lot of the air would go through this spot more than the other spots. Then again, I would just paint with the hit X and paint it on the it wouldn't be too eaten. Not a big fan. Yeah, just some subtlety is important here. Yeah, this one I'm gonna just throw away. Yeah, so this is good, and this one here would be interesting with that specular. So simply I can hit Control T and just readjust it just a tad, and then hit OK, and then create a new layer, and then make a selection based on this, and then hit B, and then right mouse button, and then go here and Alt, so I can copy this creamy off-white pearly color. I can also hide this just so I can see exactly where that line is supposed to be, here, like somewhere here, right? Just so I can copy it exactly. I don't want the sticker to be in my face to block me from doing an accurate job. Okay, now here's the sticker back again. Hit V on the keyboard, and then since you are, or I am, on this layer, V, and then 40%. So it doesn't seem like too much, but when you zoom out and you evaluate it with and without, you get to see exactly if it's doing anything. And if it's not doing that much, you can always bump up the opacity. And by the way, don't be shy with experimenting with extreme results. Like if I go even to like 100% opacity, even though you're thinking like, oh, this is too much. Well, that specular typically is too much in reality. That hotspot area, right? Don't shy away from experimenting some extreme results. Control D. Most likely it would fit really well, but of course 90% is going to be really like getting closer to the bliss point, because 100% is kind of too artificial, but 90% or 80%, you see here it's getting to that really realistic threshold. So 9.5, which is 95 opacity, and then for this sticker itself, I'm going to do the same thing with that heat. I think I kind of overkilled with the opacity, so I'm gonna bump it up to maybe 70% here for the heat. 70. And let's try here 70 as well. You can also take this and use some blurring. You can also go to image adjustment and exposure. This could be nice. You could also go with filter, blur, box blur. And you can use a combination similar to what I demonstrated before, where you can duplicate the layer and make one of them to be blurred. It's kind of weird. I'm gonna undo the blurring. It's kind of weird to see the edge of that sticker. It's just probably gonna have a lot of reflection. So I'm gonna go here with the brush and B. Control D and paint more. This kind of really almost erase that saturated line of that sticker. And that looks kind of nicer. So 90%. Yeah, it's kind of blending in better. So select the sticker now and just experiment with blending modes. Huh, this is kind of nice. Vivid light. And it's not changing the colors. Yeah, so the same practice here, I would sort of like maybe overexpose this a little bit, just make it really kind of shiny. 60% opacity, that's great. It's already doing the job. Because with 60% opacity, you're letting a lot more of that exposure in the background to be present in the scene. I'm gonna go with this one too and hit 6. Yeah, that looks good. Now this one would be interesting here. This one here, I'm just gonna go Control L to levels and darken, and then I'm gonna make a selection of it, create a new layer, hit B, D, paint the whole thing, hit 0 so I can go full opacity on that brush, just so I can have more control. Control D, V, and then 60%. Yeah, it's supposed to be hidden. And you can also go with gradient. So G. Okay. So after multiple attempts, this is what I have. And then V, and then 3%, or maybe 60%, and then Control L, or Control U to change the brightness. So having that gradient would just add a gentle, subtle variation between the bottom and the upper side of that effect. Something to consider. It doesn't look great. It does not look great. So I'm gonna erase the bottom side, and now it looks much better. And lastly we have, yeah, so this one here. Nope. Yeah, I don't like it. I knew it since the beginning. Okay, so this one here is going to be fun. I can simply just make a selection with the lasso tool, like this. And then I can erase some of that using the Alt, some of that selection. L, erase this selection here. Again, if I'm using the pen, it would be a lot easier, but it's good. It's good to have a challenge with the mouse. Control D and then just paint somewhere here too. I can also be smarter and just copy this color here, right? W, make a selection, B, and actually Alt, backspace, Control D. Okay, it looks pretty good. And now I'm going to reduce the opacity. Look at that. Same here, V, select this sticker, W for magic wand, and then B, in here, Control D, and E to erase that was on the cable. And let me also go to the mask, and because there's a lot of friction here because of those cables and the pistons whatsoever, it's definitely needed to have some dirtying up taking place. So I'm gonna reduce the brush size, hit D on the keyboard so I can default to black and white, hit X just so I can have some of that kind of friction there. This brush might not be really the best, but I like the randomness that it introduces. And as I mentioned before, you can always, after you deal with the edges, you can always hit X so you can paint the inside, so you can restore some of those visuals there. Always when you're close up, it sort of looks kind of weird. Once you zoom out, you feel like, oh, okay, it sort of makes sense. And also, I'm just gonna erase the edge in here. So F, Control 0, and this is the final result. This was a long video format apparently, and I figured I would just go through everything, and I would really talk about everything that was in my head, just so this demo hopefully can help you on, even if you're dealing with a completely different setup and situation, you would still be able to learn the thought process, most importantly, than just copying exactly what I did. So I hope this was enjoyable, and I hope you learned something from it.